Silas Vance didn't much care for the sound of anything that wasn't the wind or the rhythmic strike of his hammer against a cedar post. He was 56 years old, and his ears had been ringing since the Battle of Franklin in '64. He liked the quiet. Quiet didn't ask you for the truth. Quiet didn't bleed. He lived on a patch of high desert rimrock in northern Arizona, a place where the sun felt like a physical weight on your shoulders and the nights were cold enough to crack bone. He had 3 horses, a dog that didn't bark, and a Winchester 1873 that he kept cleaner than his own kitchen table. That afternoon, the sky was a bruised purple, the kind that promised a dry lightning storm but no rain. Silas was stretching a line of barbed wire. When he heard it, it wasn't the sound of an animal. This was the sound of something human, something desperate. He dropped his pliers and reached for the rifle leaning against the fence post. He squinted toward the shimmering heat haze of the flats. A figure was moving. It looked like a beetle from a distance, crawling slowly across the alkali dust. As it got closer, Silas realized it was a woman. She wasn't just walking. She was harnessed. She had a length of thick, frayed hemp rope looped over her shoulders like a mule. Behind her, she was dragging a wooden crate. It wasn't a large crate, no bigger than a foot locker, but by the way her boots were slipping in the dirt and the way her spine was curved like a drawn bow, it might as well have been filled with lead. She reached the perimeter of his fence and collapsed. Not a fall, but a slow folding of the limbs, as if the life had simply been squeezed out of her. Silas didn't run. Out here, you don't run toward trouble unless you're looking to join it. He walked steady, the rifle held at a low trail. She was young, maybe 25, though the dust made her look like an old woman. Her dress was a tattered gray wool, soaked through with sweat that had turned to a salty crust. Her hands, Silas winced when he saw them, were wrapped in bloody rags. She had been pulling that rope for miles. Here is the interesting part. She didn't look up. Her forehead was pressed into the hot dirt. Her voice was a dry rattle, like a snake in a hollow log. "It's too heavy," she whispered. "Please, help me." Silas looked at the crate. It was made of dark, heavy oak, reinforced with hammered iron straps. It didn't have a brand or a name on it, just a massive, rusted padlock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. "I can help you up," Silas said. She finally lifted her head. Her eyes were piercing, haunting blue, surrounded by lashes caked in red dust. She reached out a trembling, blood-stained hand and gripped the sleeve of his coat. "Don't touch it," she gasped, her eyes wide with sudden, sharp terror. "Just help me get inside. Please. They're coming. I can feel the ground shaking. They're coming for the weight." It took Silas nearly an hour to get her and that crate into the cabin. He tried to pick the crate up once. His back, already scarred from a canister shot in the war, groaned in protest. The box was unnaturally heavy. It didn't shift or rattle. It felt like a solid piece of the Earth's core had been boxed up and handed to this girl. Inside, he laid her on the cot. He didn't ask questions. He knew the look of a hunted thing. Instead, he built a fire in the stove, not for the heat, but for the light. Darkness makes fear grow, and this woman was already drowning in it. He boiled water. He cleaned her hands. The rope had burned through the first 2 layers of skin on her palms. As he worked, he noticed something. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking at the food he'd set out. Her eyes were locked on the iron-strap box in the center of the floor. "My name is Silas," he said, his voice low and steady, the way he'd talk to a horse that had a mind to bolt. She swallowed, the movement of her throat painful to watch. "Clara," she whispered, "you've come a long way." Clara, from the Oakhaven direction, if I had to guess. At the mention of Oakhaven, she flinched so hard she nearly fell off the cot. Oakhaven was a mining town 60 miles east, a hellhole owned by a man named Elias Miller, a man who thought the law was something you bought by the gallon and poured over people until they stopped breathing. "I took it from his study," she said, her voice gaining a feverish edge. "He kept it under the floorboards. He called it his legacy. But it isn't a legacy. It's a ledger. It's the weight of every soul he broke to get that gold." Silas looked at the box. He'd heard stories about Miller, stories about land grabbing and accidental fires that claimed the lives of farmers who wouldn't sell. If Miller is behind you, Silas said, he won't be alone. He'll have the Hound with him. Clara nodded, a single tear tracking a clean line to the dust on her cheek. I didn't steal it for the money. Silas, there isn't a coin in that box. It's heavier than gold. Silas reached out, his hand hovering over the iron straps. What's in it then? The truth, she whispered. And the truth is the heaviest thing in the West. Are you following the story? If yes, let me know in the comment. Do you know what's next? Before we find out what Clara was truly carrying, and before the dust on the horizon turns into men Silas feared, I want to ask you something. Have you ever carried a secret that felt like it was breaking your back? A truth that you knew would change everything if it ever saw the light? If you're still here, sitting by the fire with Silas and Clara, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it in your corner of the world? We read every comment, and your stories are the ones that keep this channel riding. If this story is hitting home, tap that like button and hit subscribe. Out here in the high desert, we don't turn anyone away from the door. Now, let's get back to the cabin. The wind is shifting. Clara had fallen into a fitful sleep, her fingers still twitching as if she were gripping that rope. Silas sat by the window, his Winchester across his knees. He found himself looking at the box again. What could be so heavy? He stood up and walked to it. He knelt. This time, he didn't try to lift it. He ran his calloused fingers over the wood. It was soaked in oil. It smelled of old paper and something metallic. Dried blood? Maybe. Suddenly, Clara's voice came from the shadows of the cot. He used it to keep the deeds, Silas, but not the legal ones. The real ones. Silas turned. She was sitting up, her eyes bright with fever. Every man Miller killed for his land, he made them sign a confession first. He'd kidnap their families, hold a gun to a child's head. He'd make the father sign papers saying they were outlaws, that they were abandoning their land, that they were tax dodgers. Then he'd kill them and take the property with a clean title. That box, it holds the names, the real families. Silas felt a cold stone settle in his gut. He knew that game. He'd seen it in the war. Men in suits using men in boots to steal the world. But why is it so heavy, Clara? She stood up, wobbling on her feet, and walked a crate. She pointed to the iron straps. It's not just a paper. Miller is a superstitious man. Every time he took a farm, he took a stone from the hearth of the house. He had a blacksmith melt down the wedding rings of the widows. He put them in the bottom of the crate. He said he wanted to own the weight of their grief so it couldn't haunt him. He thought if he locked it in iron, he'd be free of the ghosts. Silas looked at the crate with a new kind of horror. It wasn't just a box of records. It was a tomb, a literal collection of the weight of 100 ruined lives. No wonder she couldn't pull it. No wonder it felt like it was anchored to the hell it came from. And now, Silas said, his eyes turned to the window. The man who owns that weight is coming to take it back. He's here, Clara said. Silas looked out. On the far ridge, 3 lanterns were bobbing in the dark, like the eyes of a 3-headed dog. The Hounds. Silas didn't panic. He'd been in the trenches at Petersburg. He knew how to wait. Get on the floorboards, Clara. There's a space by the hearth. It's dry and deep. Silas, you don't owe me this, she said, her voice trembling. They'll kill you for that box. Silas stood up, his tall frame blocking the light of the fire. He checked the action on his Winchester. I spent 4 years fighting for a cause that was nothing but a lie told by rich men, Silas said quietly. I've spent 12 years trying to forget the sound of the people who paid the price for those lies. I think I've got just enough room in my soul to stand up for the truth once before I'm done. He pushed the heavy oak table against the door. He blew out the lamp. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room. Then the hoofbeats. Slow, arrogant. They didn't hide. They knew he was there. A voice called out from the yard. It was a voice like broken glass. Smooth but dangerous. It was Miller's personal enforcer, a man known only as Graves. Vance! We know you've got the girl, and we know you've got the master's property. Bring the box out, and we'll leave you with enough skin to keep the crows interested. Keep us waiting, and we'll burn that shack with both of you inside." Silas didn't answer. He waited until he saw a shadow past the window. Crack! The Winchester bucked against his shoulder. A scream erupted from the darkness. "One down. That's my answer," Silas yelled. The yard exploded into gunfire. Bullets tore through the thin pine walls of the cabin, shattering jars of preserves and splintering the chairs. Silas dropped to his knees behind the heavy oak box. He realized something then. The box, the legacy, was so heavy, so thick with iron and stone, that it was the only thing in the room that was bulletproof. The weight of Miller's sins was now protecting the very people trying to expose him. For 20 minutes, the air was filled with lead and smoke. Silas fired, moved, and fired again. He was a ghost in his own home. He knew where every floorboard creaked. He knew the exact angle of the moon. He saw Graves charging the door with a sledgehammer. Silas didn't use the rifle. He pulled his Colt Army .44 from his belt. The door groaned. The hinges screamed. Graves burst through, a giant of man with eyes full of hate. Silas didn't give him a chance to speak. 2 shots to the chest. Graves at the floorboards like a felled oak. The other 2 men, seeing their leader fall, didn't stay to bargain. They vanished into the night, the sound of their horses fading into the wind. When the sun rose, it didn't look like the bruised purple of the day before. It was a pale, clean gold. Silas stood on the porch, his face smeared with soot, his arm bleeding from a splinter wound. Clara emerged from the cabin, her eyes scanning the yard. She saw the bodies. She saw the silence. She looked at Silas. "It's over. For now," Silas said. "But that box, it can't stay here, and it can't stay locked." He went inside and grabbed Graves' sledgehammer. He stood over the crate. He thought about the stones from the hearths. He thought about the wedding rings. He thought about the names written in blood. He swung. The iron straps resisted at first, then groaned. He swung again, and again. On the 4th strike, the lock shattered. He pried the lid open with a crowbar. Clara gasped. At the very top were the ledgers. Hundreds of them. But beneath the papers, just as she had said, was a bed of smooth river stones. And scattered among the stones were bits of gold, broken jewelry, melted coins, watch casings. But there was something else. At the very bottom, Silas found a small, leather-bound Bible. He opened it. On the inside cover, a name was written. Vance. Silas froze. He felt the world tilt. He flipped through the pages. It wasn't his Bible. It was his brother's. His brother, Caleb, who had disappeared 10 years ago after moving to the Oakhaven area to start a ranch. Silas had spent a decade wondering if Caleb had just run out on the family. He reached into the box and pulled out a deed. Caleb Vance, Section 12, Oakhaven. Attached to it was a confession signed in a shaky hand, claiming Caleb had stolen cattle from Miller. It was a lie. A 10-year-old lie that had cost Silas his brother and his peace. The weight Clara had been carrying, it was Silas's own history. He sat down on the floor, the paper trembling in his hand. He realized that for 12 years, he'd been living in a prison of not knowing, and this girl, who he'd never met, had dragged the truth across 60 miles of desert to put at his feet. They didn't bury the box. They took the ledgers to the circuit judge in Prescott. It took 3 years of trials. It took more blood and more threats. But in the end, Elias Miller didn't die by a gun. He died in a cold cell, stripped of every acre he'd ever stolen. The land was returned to the families. The stones were returned to the hearths. Clara stayed at the ranch for a while. She helped Silas mend the fences. She helped him find the spot where his brother had been buried. And they put a proper stone there. Not a stone of weight, but a stone of memory. Silas stayed on his rimrock. He still liked the quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the quiet of a man hiding from the world. It was the quiet of a man who had finally set his burden down. Before you go, think about this. Some weights are meant to be carried. Some weights are meant to be shared. But no weight is meant to stay buried forever. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that the truth is always worth climb, give us a like. Share this with someone who's carrying a heavy load today. And don't forget to subscribe so you can join us for the next ride into the heart of the Old West. 'Cause out here, the stories don't end. They just change hands. We'll see you at the next campfire.